Welcome to this edition of CBN News Showcase. I'm Mark Martin. The death toll in Ecuador is now well over 550 after last weekend's major earthquake, and it's difficult to get food, water, and other supplies to all of the people who need them. Chuck Holton reports.
These survivors of last week's quake have been waiting in line all day for a food truck to deliver supplies. As of 5 p.m., the truck had not arrived, and tempers were starting to flare.
We need a lot of things, especially food, meal, water. There's no water.
There's no water in the tap. How do we bathe or drink? What little they are giving out isn't nearly enough.
The scale of this disaster makes quick response very difficult. Many of those affected are in remote areas along the coast, now reachable only by air. These Ecuadorian Air Force helicopters are struggling to get enough aid to small villages near the epicenter of the quake. CBN accompanied this flight to the town of Hama. Now we're going to wait for them to unload the helicopter, turn around and go right back where we came from. Soldiers quickly unloaded the supplies, a drop in the bucket compared to the need. Many of these buildings in Puerto Viejo still standing are now uninhabitable and will have to be demolished. And rescue workers continue to race against the clock, looking for survivors amid the ruins. As if destroyed buildings and infrastructure, hundreds still trapped, and tens of thousands homeless weren't enough, a lack of fresh water is the latest tragedy in the unfolding crisis in Ecuador. With temperatures in the 90s during the day, dehydration is becoming a real issue. City dwellers like these in the city of Manta are flocking to distribution centers looking for food, clothing, and fresh water. Throughout the area, people are getting desperate, and Operation Blessing is stepping in to help. Pastor Paul Candela heads a large church in Puerto Viejo that's working together with Operation Blessing.
Things are pretty difficult right now because as the hours and days go by, things get more complicated. The rescue teams will soon stop looking for survivors and just move forward with the recovery of those who have died in the rubble.
Church members are volunteering to help OB assemble and distribute hundreds of care packages with food and water.
We see a future where there will be a lot of suffering because employees without work means business owners without businesses, which means people won't be able to pay their bills and they won't have a way to get by. Everything affects everything else, and this will lead to big social problems in the future.
The Operation Blessing volunteers are working to alleviate people's suffering and save lives by reaching areas outside the city.
Right now we are focused on serving the community, going to outlying places that have no food or water and giving out supplies.
And the situation is worst where thirsty people line the roads begging for water and getting more and more desperate with every car that passes by. Carmen Rivera's baby, John Paul, is only 3 weeks old. His mother is beside herself.
There is no milk or diapers for my baby. He can't nurse because I'm not making milk and his formula has run out. The stores are closed up because the buildings are all destroyed. We sent someone out to look for milk, but they couldn't find any.
It will likely be months before these residents can get water from their own taps again, and many here are afraid they won't be able to hold out that long. Operation Blessing will stay here as long as it takes, bringing water to the people who need it most. Chuck Holton, CBN News, Manta, Ecuador.
In other news, 3 state and local officials in Michigan are facing criminal charges related to the unprecedented water crisis in the city of Flint. David Brody has that story.
With each sip of water, Otilia Brank takes a risk.
I'm afraid, to drink water. So with the water, I pray for it before, I drink.
While people here take the gamble, politicians play the blame game for this humanitarian crisis.
A water expert at the federal EPA tried to raise the alarm in February 2015, and he was silenced.
There were people, more than one, that were making decisions and thinking that, well, maybe Flint isn't who we should go out on a limb for. Are you kidding me?
Here in Detroit, until a few years ago, the city of Flint actually got their water from the Motor City. But then in 2014, the city of Flint decided to use the Flint River to save money. And then it wasn't long after that residents started to complain about how the water tasted and smelled. And then there were the reports of rashes. In October 2014, the GM plant stopped using Flint water after it began corroding its car parts. Since then, the finger pointing has been nonstop. Flint's former mayor, Dane Walling, says the Department of Environmental Quality assured him the water was safe.
It's your standard tap water.
Republicans blame the EPA. The EPA pointed to resistance at state and local levels. At the state level, accusations continue against Michigan Governor Rick Snyder for ignoring warnings about high lead levels. Snyder says he trusted state officials who told him the water was fine.
The Department of Environmental Quality assured us that Flint's water was safe. It wasn't.
Plausible deniability only works when it's plausible, and I'm not buying that you didn't know about any of this until October 2015. You were not in a medically induced coma for a year.
Meanwhile, residents saw a spike in Legionnaire's disease, hair loss, and E. coli. All of this before people like Otelia received official warnings about the toxic water. With all the blame going around, the people of Flint are tired of words. They need a solution.
The smell is in the bathroom and the water from the faucet. I smell kind of, like it's wasted.
Despite the smell, Otelia says she still bathes in the water because she doesn't have another option.
Bathing, yes, I use the water because I don't have enough water, to go around.
But like a stream in the desert, the church is there to provide relief. Churches like El Shaddai Assembly of God, where Pastor Abe Garcia leads the way.
We're a smaller church, but we always want to do something. We always want to reach out to our community. And so we just started devising praying and getting a plan together. And in January is when we just wanted to become a water distribution center.
That's exactly what they did. With 30% of Garcia's congregation directly affected by the toxic water, they got the ball rolling with a seed offering from the Latin Assemblies of God. And then the help really poured in.
We got connected with Catholic Charities, which is located here in Flint as well. And they have a great water distribution center going on there. They're doing awesome work. And so we connected with them. They're supplying a lot of the water that we have here. We're also getting water from churches in Detroit. There's a church in Detroit. It's Eternal Rock. They're going to be bringing us water as well. We have water. We had a delivery 2 Saturdays ago from a church in Grand Rapids, a Hispanic church.
And soon, Christians from around the country of various denominations and backgrounds began helping those in need, not only at El Shaddai, but at churches throughout the city. Despite the gloomy situation, Garcia says he is seizing the opportunity to distribute the most important water of all, the living water.
The most important water that you need is the water of life that comes from Jesus. Jesus is that water. And so we talked about the encounter of Jesus and the Samaritan woman, how she came and she needed both types of water, most importantly the spiritual water. And then also she needed to draw water from the well.
The work and love by the Flint churches goes a long way with residents like Otelia. And while back in Washington, politicians look to place blame, Otelia says her eyes are fixed on God and her heart full of thanks.
It's a lot of hassle, going out to get water, to have water enough, for cooking and stuff like that. Thank God for this. I should I provide for.
David Brody, CBN News, in Flint, Michigan.
The Amazon.com of baby parts. That's how a congressman described one company's involvement in Planned Parenthood's alleged sale of baby body parts. A congressional panel revealed evidence that the company STEM Express acted as a middleman on behalf of Planned Parenthood and explained how customers could click on a drop-down box that lists organs and gestation periods. Critics on the panel say the hearing is part of a political agenda to restrict women's health care. But others say that unborn babies should not be bought and sold, and the companies involved must be held accountable. A University of North Georgia atheist group handed out fetus and sperm-shaped cookies at their pro-abortion rally last week. The display set up by the Skeptics Society also had signs stating abortion should remain legal because, which encouraged passerbys to fill in their reasons. In response, a pro-life group at UNG posted pictures of the display to their Facebook page, saying the broken cookies sadly resemble what dismemberment abortions look like. The times we live in. Wow. Well, you can read the full report on our website, cbnnews.com. Presidential elections always serve as reminders of the democratic process that makes America great. And while campaigns can get nasty, there's also beauty behind it all. One of presidential candidate Ted Cruz's foreign policy advisors also happens to be a top-notch art historian. And as she told CBN's Paul Strand, democracy and freedom have led to some of the greatest artistic achievements of mankind.
Freedom and freed-up minds led artists and architects to breathtaking new heights. Dr. Coates, as you're talking about democracy and the birth of Western civilization and all, first of all, tell us how the Parthenon ties into that.
Well, Paul, the Parthenon is really the paradigmatic image object for this study because it's in front of the Parthenon that Pericles stands up and says, we are Athens, and the reason we are the greatest city in Greece is because we are a democracy. And he really believed that building this enormous, beautiful, perfect temple with its extraordinary sculpture was a way to celebrate that. And he wanted that message to be here for us for future generations.
And is that one of the first times when we see that with liberty and with civilization comes great art?
This is absolutely the first time. It had never been tried before. It's why the Greek experiment was so audacious. And it was short, but it had extraordinary achievements in literature, in history, and in the fine arts.
Okay, well then moving over to Michelangelo's David, tie that into Western civilization, democracy, art altogether.
Well, and David is the kingpin of the book, and he gives the book its name because from the book of Samuel you know that the shepherd David was so pure in his faith that he could kill the giant Goliath with his slingshot. So we make the sling the metaphor for democracy, and Michelangelo, very few people know, was a committed Democrat, it was small d, and carved this statue very much to be a tribute to the Florentine Republic and very much against the Medici family. And so what most people don't know, that's its original context. He was a warrior for freedom.
And in fact, even the way he's looking and he's posed and all is like in I'm ready to get you, right?
There's a very deliberate moment that Michelangelo chose, that we have to remain watchful always in the defense of liberty.
Okay. Moving to now to America. This painting, this is by
Albert Bierstadt.
And it's Lander's Peak, and tie that into the American dream and manifest destiny.
It's a fascinating picture of enormous landscape painted on the same scale as Washington crossing the Delaware, which was very deliberate on Bierstadt's part. And he was one of the first artists to travel west with the goal of showing people what this looked like. And this picture was painted right after the Civil War to honor Frederick Lander, who had been his guide and was a great Civil War general and died in the war. And Bierstadt wanted to offer something that would be hopeful after the war, and the notion that the United States could heal and then expand west is really the message of the painting.
And the man that he went out there with, this general you were talking about, he even gave a lecture, didn't he, about how important tie together what his lecture was about.
Well, Lander is an extraordinary man. On the one hand, he would wrestle grizzly bears. He was a giant of a man, same height as Abraham Lincoln. But on the other, he really believed America could develop a culture to rival Europe. And that's why he very much wanted to go build a road. And he was famous for bringing in his contracts under budget and on time, which was shocking in Washington then as now. But he very much wanted this beauty to come east so people would know what was in store for them.
Exactly. Took artists with him so that he could show Americans, not just tell them about it. Well, then let's move to Guernica by Pablo Picasso, because this is sort of the, if the others are about great things about democracy, this is more the anti-democracy painting, right?
Well, it's turned into the great protest picture, but what it really is Picasso's response to the threat of fascism. And what was different about fascism is this was an existential threat to liberty. Rather than the Medici wanting to take over Florence, the fascists wanted to extinguish the notion of liberty. And Picasso was actually looking at the Parthenon. He had studied casts of the Parthenon pediments, and he repeats that shape and some of the forms of the sculptures because I think he wanted to call out for help against this threat and show us what we were in danger of losing.
Amen. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Victoria Coates, author of David's Sling, A History of Democracy in 10 Works of Art. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul.
It's an ongoing concern for most Christian parents is how to raise their children to love the Lord. Parents of children who have decided to leave the Christian faith often have a lot of pain, and some feel they are to blame. Our Lori Johnson spoke with a marriage and family therapist who says it's just not that simple.
Dr. Linda, some recent online articles have seemed to indicate a relationship between parental behavior and children who grow up to embrace their parents' faith. Is there a correlation?
Well, there's an obvious correlation, Lori, because parents are the ones who are in charge of equipping their kids, of teaching their kids, of training their kids. This is clearly stated in the Bible. Now, the issue with that is, what do you remember about a great teacher? If our job as a parent is to teach our children, one of the things we know is that a good teacher has passion. So as parents, we have to be very passionate about our faith when we're teaching our kids. The second thing about a good teacher is that a good teacher has a strong emotional bond with his student. And so one of the things that I hear constantly in therapy from young adults who have fallen away from the faith is they tell me, they say, you know, my parents were there, they talked about God, we were religious, we went to church, but my parents didn't really know me.
For those parents who do have prodigal children, who have walked away from the faith that they grew up with, what should those parents do to try to bring that child back? And is there anything that parents can do? I mean, we look at the example in the Bible of the father of the prodigal son. He just waited and clearly, we would assume, would be praying.
And had open arms when that child was to come back. So I think one of the things that you can do is never give up. Just continue to pray. If there are things that you've done wrong, that you feel like they weren't helpful to your children, and I can think of some things in my own life. I've gone back to my young adult children and I've said, you know, I don't think I handled that right. I want to ask your forgiveness for that. Here's what I'm thinking would be a better way to deal with these kinds of issues. As parents, we can acknowledge our own mistakes and brokenness. Forgiveness is a big part of relationships and asking our kids. But the other part of that is really being firm in that prayer and believing that something or someone is going to come along. Maybe it won't be you as the parent, but something. We know that God can move mountains, that things can in their lives can be arranged in such a way that sometimes they'll meet somebody or they'll have an experience that will begin to change their hearts. And whenever that happens, then we're just there when we're ready to help them pick up the pieces and move things along in a much more positive direction.
And I loved what you said about keeping the door open. Always make sure that your adult child knows you love them, because a lot of times when adults settle down and get married and have children of their own, all of a sudden their faith turns around.
Yeah. And they begin to see, because they're walking through the life you've already walked through, and they're starting to think, my parents aren't that dumb. They actually know things, and maybe the way they're living their life. But that speaks to another point. One of the things that is so helpful is as you as a parent can live an authentic Christian life. And I mean authentic. When I say that, I mean you're not constantly being hypocritical in what you do and what you say, that you're constantly showing kindness and love to other people, that you're trying to be non-judgmental to people that don't know God, and you're trying to understand their world by constantly questioning people, asking them why they believe what they believe. Where is that behavior taking them? Are they finding peace? Are they finding happiness? The more we model that kind of engagement with people that are not Christians, the more kids that are not following the faith will look at us and go, wow, there really is something different about my parents. They seem to be happy, satisfied, they have joy, they have basically the fruit of the Spirit operating in their life. And there's something about that then draws them in to the contrast of what they see with people who don't have faith. So don't underestimate the power you have of modeling your faith and living that in an authentic way in front of your children.
And so many of us know and have friends who have adult children who are prodigals, and we all, of course, know people in our churches like this. What can friends and church members do to encourage parents of prodigal children?
Yeah, that's a great point, because part of the duty, I think, of the church is that we come alongside each other and we're lifting their hands, kind of like Aaron did for Moses. When they're weary, when they're struggling, when they feel like things are going so bad, the best thing is to have another person in the church come to you and say, you know what? I see you're down today. We're gonna lay hands on you. We're gonna pray. We're gonna pray for that child and believe that God is going to do something. Standing on the promises of God, nothing is impossible with God. Through Christ, all things are possible. To never give up that hope that person will eventually come to Christ. So the church has an incredible place to play, and the church is also the place that strong families can begin to teach their kids at an early age and set up those things like reading the creeds in church so that children know, what do I believe? What is it that I really stand for? So that when they encounter the culture that is so counter what sometimes the Christian faith is, that they will have a firm foundation. That's part of the work of the church, how it comes alongside families, and it contributes to that formation of every child.
Well, I certainly encourage all of our viewers to go to your website because you have excellent advice. It's so important for parents to raise their children in the church, to know and love the Lord. But even if you do everything right, sometimes children do walk away from the faith in which they were raised, but there is that hope that they will come back. Dr. Linda Mintle, thanks so much for your time.
Appreciate it.
Operation Blessing is battling Zika in Latin America, a virus transmitted by mosquitoes that threatens baby development. Operation Blessing launched a major multi-country relief effort to help mothers like Tatiana. They're providing mosquito nets and bug spray and providing education for local health workers. Operation Blessing is partnering with government agencies to introduce mosquito-eating fish, turtles, and crustaceans called copepods. You can find out more about Operation Blessing by going to their website at ob.org. And that's all for this edition of the CBN News Showcase. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com. Also, stay up to date with CBN News through Facebook and Twitter. Hope you'll join us next time. Have a wonderful day.